teach me in the way I want to be taught, but I'm not going to tell you, you know, guess.
In the spring of 1992, the Bach Center asked 40 undergraduates what helped them learn.
The professor was entertaining, but an entertaining professor does not make a good class.
In a professor, I would like to see clarity, first of all.
I think the teaching really is more of a tool that the students can use.
I really want a teacher who just inspires but allows a lot of freedom.
He's concerned about our learning and not just, you know, about us opening our heads and him pouring stuff in. He wants
Here's a
us really
sample of their opinions of style and the mechanics of presentation.
He went through the steps like as you'd think through them, so that you could follow the reasoning as you went along.
And the amount and organization of the workload.
The harder I work in a class, paradoxically, it seems like the more I enjoy it.
The relationship between the TFs and the professors in the course.
In section, they should go over the material that was presented in class, as well as perhaps going a little bit deeper or providing us with analogies that help us to understand what's going on, because often, you know, we can know in our minds what the professor said, but not truly understand what it means. And
sensitivity to issues of individuality, race, gender.
The worst feeling in a section is when people are talking about things that sort of silence you.
Causes for resentment and loss of interest.
One thing I really don't like in TFs is when they treat the students like it's a secondary priority for them.
And what general attitudes they find helpful.
TFs that are really involved, that are really excited about the work that they're doing, that really want to be there and are not just doing it for whatever money they make. Definitely you get a better experience from those people.
They'll describe their expectations.
I expected classes to be really, really good and well taught. And I found that they were not taught at all, that the principle was that you go out and you learn for yourself, and you go to class to discover what it is you don't know, and you go to the libraries to find out what you need to know.
They'll express some of their needs.
I think a good section leader is very clear about what it is you're going to be discussing, not only today, but next week. You have a lot of work to do any week, and you're not going to do 100% of the reading, not when you have 300 pages of reading to do. So it's going to be better for everybody if you know what you're focusing on.
I do more work, and I get to know the material better when I have like definite assignments that are due at definite times.
What you're seeing in class is a small window of a larger person leading a challenging and complex life.
you'll have people who have a lot of other things on their plate. They'll be doing sports, they'll be editors of magazines.
It's 2 minutes after the hour of 9 o'clock, and you're tuned to WHRB 95.3 in Cambridge. What happened to me this semester was that I took on too many things. I was doing the radio, being a DJ, and training to be a studio engineer. I was singing with the Radcliffe Choral Society. I was the secretary for the fall semester. And I tried doing a women's water polo, which was totally off the wall for me since I just learned how to swim last year.
I volunteer almost all of my spare time at Harvard in a housing project in Cambridge. If I didn't have the outside activities, I don't think that I could focus on my schoolwork. I mean, definitely my volunteering is my leisure.
The most important thing is to allow the students to bring some of that outside learning into the classroom.
The educational resource that's been the most valuable has really been other students.
As students grow from freshman year to graduation, their needs change. The senior tutor of Adams House shares her observations. Janet Vigiani.
You're talking to people who are literally experiencing the world in a completely new way at every, maybe not at every moment, but at many moments. And that's an extraordinary thing to look at. I love that. Don't think about something that I think teachers, especially graduate students, are not always aware of is the extent to which they have an impact on the lives of students, or that they can have an impact on the lives of students. someone who's 24 and is a first-year graduate student doesn't necessarily see themselves as that different from a 21-year-old senior, but the 21-year-old senior may in fact see them as quite different. Certainly the freshman student will. And that gives the teacher potential for molding, for influencing, for creating a real impact in the life of the student. And if that's used well, then the student grows. And if that's either not seen or not used well, then the student can actually be hurt, or the student can just be left indifferent.
TFs sometimes walk this fine line between expecting a lot out of their students when the students have a lot of classes and things to deal with, but at the same time not sort of respecting them enough and expecting their ideas to be worth a lot.
If I could say one thing to graduate students, I think I would tell them to listen to students much more than they do before they begin to try and teach them, to listen to them for all of the incredibly varied experiences that they have, and then try and take them into account. I think that's, if you do that, you can't really go wrong.
It really does help to have a professor or a TF express interest in you as a person, because so often at the school you feel like you're not an individual, you're just a number.
When they take times to sort of personalize their remarks to you when they hand back their papers, when they started off, instead of just saying, you did this and this and this and this is bad, but say, Brad, this is what I think you should be working on. And it feels more like they're talking directly to you rather than talking to someone they don't know.
When you enter a section, the TF sets the atmosphere right there. Do you go around and introduce yourself, your names, and what your major is, what your year is, where you're from? Do you tell a little something about yourself? Or do does section leader just come in and start the section? That right away sets the tone.
All through high school, the only time I ever studied or did any homework was just to please my teacher, and it was because I liked my teachers. And after I came here, I found that not only didn't I not like my teachers, I didn't even know them. And so the motivation for studying had to change completely for me to get any work done. And it did help a great deal when I had TFs whom I really liked and who I knew at a personal level. I really worked and enjoyed working because I was doing something that they expected me to do.
I think it's important to get a sense of how the students are learning, A lot of TFs come in and they think teaching material is just throwing out information, but that's more of an instructor. A teacher gets a sense of the students and knows how to work with them, and knows how to work with their personalities. And I think that's the key.
One of the things that I think is so important in teaching or advising is that you have to realize that you're doing it for the love of something else, which is, in this case, the students, for the love of the students. And you have to get your own ego out of the way as much as you can. I think one of the dangers of being a member of the faculty or even an advisor is to become gratified by the attention or the affection, the various roles that the students put you in, and to actually think of yourself as these things in reality.
Students know that their success in the course depends on some things that are beyond their control, like the relationship between the teaching fellow and the professor.
I think it would do the system a lot more justice to call the professors lecturers and the TFs the professors.
I've had wonderful, committed graduate students who've really cared about the students as people. I've had other graduate students who were, clearly lost and adrift and, trying to make some money and didn't really care or didn't have the time or under too much pressure to care, and that's really a shame, because I think that because you have that multi-tiered level, where the knowledge has to trickle down from the professor to the graduate student to the student, that if the graduate student is the missing link in there, you really lose a lot. I think it's important for teaching fellows to have a real grasp on what the professor is trying to do, and then on the other side of it, I think it's really important for them to understand what level their students are at. I think that's a big problem actually with graduate students, is that they're not really clear on what their audience is. And frequently you find graduate students talking above their students' heads and assuming a level of knowledge or experience that isn't there. You also find them talking below their students and treating them like they're in high school, treating them like they don't have certain thinking capabilities, and that's just irritating, and it makes a student kind of close off their mind and not really want to listen anymore. But I think that graduate students in general, to be good teachers, need to be receptive to students and need to elicit responses to figure out at what level they should be teaching.
It's really hard when a TF comes in and says, all right, what did the professor do today in class? And then the students who may not have had a very clear idea themselves are just kind of sitting there helpless. I was in a physics class once where the professor actually moved very quickly through the material and sometimes left out steps that would have helped me understand it better. And the TF was he sort of came in, he'd come to lecture, he'd see what the professor was doing, and then he'd sort of interpret the lectures for us in a way. He'd sort of illustrate the concepts which were underpinning the professor's examples. He would make sure that we actually understood what was going on. Sort of reinterpreting the lecture was very helpful.
I really have to come to the defense of this TF teaching system because although professors have a lot more depth of knowledge and a lot more history behind them, TFs can offer us a perspective that professors can't because they're near our age and they're often in graduate school, which is something we're contemplating. And there's a sort of kinship that we can form with TFs that we can't form with professors. And I don't know that I would give that up just to study with a big-name professor. Some of my closest friends here and actually some of my best advisors have been graduate students, and the age factor, the fact that we're close to each other in age, has contributed significantly to our ability to relate.
Me personally, I really find it helpful if the class is tightly structured. I think that the students in the class are much more awake when they know that there's an agenda. It helps when the teaching fellow tells the students, this is my goal, this is what I'm trying to get out of the section.
Usually when you take a humanities course, there's so much reading that you can't do all of it. And so everyone comes to section and doesn't do anything, and then discussion is really unproductive. And if a TF gives out, like, okay, we'll discuss like these 5 questions, at least people know what kind of reading to do or what kind of things to be thinking about beforehand, and it helps discussion a lot.
But on the other hand, it gets to the point where you're going to discussion section just sort of, loathing it and bored, and you walk in and you know what it's going to be like, as opposed to some sections I've been in which were much more exciting. You go in thinking, well, what's going to happen today?
In terms of abilities, that's the most important thing, figuring out where your students are and if you're actually addressing what they need to get out of section. Just, constantly make sure they're participating, or if they're not, ask them, how you're doing outside of section.
There is a concern on their part as to how much I learn. Sometimes that gets tempered with a concern about what I should learn. That tends to be the dichotomy. Generally, when they're trying to teach me something very specific, that's not good.
Different students learn in different types of ways.
New material for us can become a discovery if the TF's presented as such.
I never say I study because I never am just like going back over material. I'm always doing things for the first time. You've probably heard the saying that intro science courses should be a funnel, not a sieve, that instead of, or a pump, not a sieve, instead of filtering people out, they should get people really psyched and really excited about going on into science. And I think, unfortunately, what most intro science classes end up doing is they hurl problem sets at you. They put you in classes with 300, 400 other people, and often you're freshmen, and so you're not quite sure what's going on. So it can be very discouraging. What I think they should do is, in a lot of these intro classes, I think they should try to give the freshmen little hints about what really goes on into science, like assign them a journal article to read or tell them about some fascinating area of research. Because when you're up at 2 o'clock at night doing a problem set, you just can't see through these 4 years into what's really exciting.
The best way they could go about teaching someone is not really giving them what they need to know, but giving them the opportunity and the direction so the students can go ahead and explore themselves. Because discovery is always the best part. When you learn something on your own, you realize, oh, this is the way things work. it clicks much quicker in your mind than if someone were to just present this to you and say, master this by tomorrow at noon.
Sometimes I feel that we don't expect enough of the students in a deeper internal sense. I worry sometimes that we treat them more like children in that way.
And some of the classes that I've enjoyed the most are ones which I've had to work the most at, but which, you know, because I spent so much time on them, I really felt like changed my life. I remember one semester I had a big course load. I was taking 5 courses, and one of them was a classical Greek course. It was one of these lyricists, Pindar, and I ended up having to, if I wanted to do as well in that class as I wanted to, I had to translate about 30 or 35 hours a week just in that class.
You see them lose interest and lose commitment when there aren't expectations of them, and where those expectations aren't carried throughout the course. Certainly when I was a student, and I see this now, if you knew very clearly that everything that you did, everything that you turned in mattered, and that it mattered when you turned it in, and mattered what was in it, and that you were going to hear back from the professor about what you had done, then that increased a commitment to the class quite a bit, and then it increased what you got out of it.
Some professors didn't seem as concerned about teaching as some other professors.
I mean, he was a knowledgeable guy, you know.
He knows exactly what he's supposed to do and say, I guess, but he just doesn't know how to go about doing it.
He would literally write his lecture notes verbatim on the board.
He doesn't speak very well, he doesn't speak very clearly, he sort of mumbles.
And then if he got confused, a million people would try to correct him.
He just couldn't teach. That was the thing. I mean, he would make an effort to teach, but he just couldn't teach.
It creates a lot of problems when the teacher assumes that his way is the only way.
It's kind of like you feel like you're twisting their arm if you ask them a question.
And they're bored of it, but they have to teach, so they come and they tell it to you, but also convey the idea that they don't appreciate the fact that they're forced to do this.
They come into the room, and all of a sudden, when they sit down, they just become a part of the chair.
And you don't really feel like listening to such people.
I don't care how much the teacher knows. If he can't convey that material to the student, he's no good to me.
One thing I know that students get very upset about, and that seems to be quite widespread here, and I actually don't understand it, is turning in an exam, turning in a paper, and never getting it back, or getting it back with a grade and no comments whatsoever.
I had a wonderful experience with EC first semester of last year, and I'm taking the second half now. And it's possibly the worst section I've had. And the reason really is because the person who's teaching the class, first of all, doesn't seem to understand the material that well himself. And he uses the Socratic method in a very pejorative way. And he pokes questions at people who seem to be not paying attention incessantly. And it makes me feel going into class very defensive and not eager to learn, not eager to ask questions myself, because he makes us feel like we don't understand the material. And it's something that has really kind of dissuaded me from taking part in the class and from really wanting to study the material.
If you become accustomed to not participating in a section, then it's very hard to all of a sudden start participating. And then sections don't really become very fruitful either. If you're not participating and you're not really understanding, you're basically stuck.
I think students want teachers to challenge them, but they also want teachers to sort of respect their ideas, not necessarily undermine them. I think students like to be pushed in a way, not necessarily harshed on.
What I like in a teaching fellow is when he or she clearly states at the beginning of the course that everybody's participation will be actively encouraged and actively sought.
The confidence has to build over time. You can't force the freshman to say, okay, George, what do you think?
Design the section so that someone who doesn't know what they're doing can get drawn into the discussion, can get drawn into the problem.
Act as if everybody is having a part in the discussion, even if someone's not as talkative, that realize that they're listening and that they're learning how to have this kind of dialogue. And that if they haven't talked, it's not necessarily because they haven't done the reading, it's just because, you know, they're not confident yet.
Gender is really important to me because I never really thought about it until I had experiences that made me feel marginal in a classroom, and I wasn't necessarily doing as well as I thought I should be in a class. And it wasn't until maybe my second year at Harvard that I really began to think about how those factors are really present in the classroom, even if they're never talked about, even if you're only talking about a subject that has nothing to do with it.
I think discrimination is, at Harvard and at other sort of fine institutions, is a very different thing than one would have thought it was or other people think it is. I think that it certainly occurs, but it's more insensitivity, sort of questions of asking people to be representatives of things that they're not necessarily, which is impossible. Ultimately, just like anyone else, they represent themselves, and sometimes not even that.
There's any number of very subtle things that can really affect the way that things like gender and race dynamics are made manifest in a classroom. There's things like what kind of language a teaching fellow uses, whether it's gender-inclusive language or no. I think it's really important to incorporate thinking about how gender is a different experience for people, or race, or class, or regional background.
Energy is infectious, and no matter what size the class, you need to have a lot of energy and show that you're enjoying this and that you enjoy your field. Because if someone's considering a career in physics or chemistry or biochemistry, they want to know that the people in that field like it.
I've had 2 or 3 really good TFs, and what to me has been so great about them is that they have such an enthusiasm for the subject matter. They really know the subject matter, and they have a very healthy academic intensity. Their intensity is not, the way that they look at academics is not in this competitive mode of, oh, I'm going to be able to beat this other person. It's because I really, truly love this subject, and I want to tell you about it, and I want to give it to you, and I want to show it to you. And that, for me, that makes me excited too. I mean, it's kind of like a spark that, spreads to everybody.
He reached out his hand to me, and he was like, if you need this, if you're having problems, feel free to call me.
It's the people who take the time to show concern and care about how you're doing overall that really make the difference and make you feel really important and really special.
There is no question in my mind that the connection between the teacher and student is the essence of the vitality that makes the teaching relationship real and alive and effective. If that wasn't important, people could just learn by video.